What happens when a CEO realizes that the very people he trusted with the operations of his company could be the cause of its downfall? To uncover the truth, he doesn't call a meeting. He doesn't send warning emails. He disguises himself as a regular mechanic, stepping into the very garage they claimed was the smoothest running one. And the first thing he sees isn't broken machinery. It's a young black woman tightening bolts with a cracked wrench, blood oozing from her hand, while the manager shouts, belittles her, and treats the staff as if they were trash. This is not just a story about a poorly run repair shop. It's about a corrupt system, operated with laziness, indifference, and arrogance, where human dignity is crushed by the power of those at the top. But they forgot one thing. The man they thought was a nobody is the one who owns everything. And when he stands up, exposing it all, some lose their jobs, some find justice, and a girl who was once dismissed will become the leader of an entirely new platform. Jared Foster sat quietly in the back seat of an old Uber, staring blankly through the misted window. The gentle morning rain was not enough to wet the pavement, but it stirred his mind like the negative feedback flooding in from customers, the ones who had once trusted the Foster automotive chain his father built over 30 years. They complained about everything: careless repairs, endless waiting times, cold employee attitudes. All the complaints followed the same recurring pattern, like an alarm ringing. Pete Wallace, the regional manager Jared had entrusted to oversee most of the garages, kept reporting that the problem was a lack of staff, slow supply chains, and customers being too demanding. But Jared had been in business long enough to sniff out the smell of deceit. Everything couldn't just be coincidental. Something was wrong, and he couldn't keep managing the company through emails or revenue reports. It was time to go to the bottom. No warning, no meetings, no internal memos. Jared decided to go straight to the source, undercover, to see what his employees were really going through. For the past 3 weeks, he had prepared quietly. He grew a beard, cut his hair short, wore a low baseball cap that covered half his face, an old hoodie, and oil-stained jeans. Fake personnel documents were meticulously arranged. He chose a simple name for himself, Joe Daniels. None of the mechanics in the garage had ever met the CEO. They only knew his father's image, Henry Foster, hanging in the break room, an older face, a warm smile, and a proud motto, "We don't just fix cars, we keep our promises." But that promise was now being twisted, and Jared, or Joe, was about to begin his journey at garage number 3, where Pete had assured him everything was running as smoothly as premium motor oil. The car stopped. Jared took a deep breath. The smell of exhaust, burnt rubber, and damp air filled his nose. He opened the door and stepped out, heavy with anticipation. In front, the white-painted sign had faded, with several letters peeling off. Inside was a world Jared thought he knew, but he was about to uncover a truth he was never ready to face. And what he didn't know was that in this small, grimy garage, a young black teen girl was quietly fighting every day, and she would shake both his heart and his ideals. The frosted glass door of garage office number 3 creaked as Jared pushed it open. A damp wave of oil and sweat mixed with the sound of metal clashing from within the workshop. No greetings, no friendly glances. No one paid any attention to the man in the wrinkled gray hoodie, oil-stained jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, just as Jared had planned. He had officially stepped into the role of Joe Daniels, a part-time mechanic looking for work. Behind a desk cluttered with paperwork, Ray Dawson sat with his feet propped up, fiddling with his phone, his head down, not even glancing up when the door opened. He was a man in his 40s, with a belly spilling over his waistband, a tight company polo shirt, an oil-stained collar, and a voice that slurred as if everyone was bothering him. "You're Joe, right?" Ray asked lazily, eyes still on the screen. Yeah, Joe Daniels, Jared replied in a slightly hoarse voice, the tone of a newbie mechanic. Ray nodded toward a pile of old shirts in the corner of the room. Grab a shirt and go out to the shop. Just don't break anything. No need for any intro here. No paperwork, no background check, no safety instructions. Jared frowned slightly. His father had always taught him, every employee who steps into a garage is responsible for their own safety and that of their teammates. Yet here, running smoothly seemed to mean neglecting safety. He changed into the shirt in the dilapidated bathroom at the end of the hall. The sink leaked water, the mirror cracked, and the smell of bleach mixed with gasoline stung his nostrils. When he stepped back into the workshop, Jared paused, not because of the busy scene, but because of the quiet chaos unfolding. The garage appeared to be busy. Cars filled every repair bay, customers stood in the waiting area, some of them frowning at their watches. But no one was directing. No one was coordinating. The mechanics, wearing faded uniforms, worked in a tense, passive-aggressive manner, quick movements, but disorganized. There was no assignment board, no system in place. A bearded man stood smoking near the fuel area. Another technician struggled to remove a wheel, but was using a broken tool. Jared glanced down at his feet. A broken wrench lay scattered near the walkway. Hazards were strewn about like invisible mines. One mistake and an accident would happen. The screeching of metal pulled him from his thoughts. At the far end of the garage, Jared saw a young black girl kneeling beneath the hood of an old sedan. Her hair was tied back in a rag, her face damp with sweat, her fingers swollen and bloody, yet she continued tightening bolts with a crooked wrench. A broken ratchet wrapped in gray duct tape sat nearby, symbolizing the tragic helplessness of the situation. Without needing to ask, Jared knew right away. This wasn't a coincidence. This was the consequence of systematic neglect. He walked over to her. "Need some help?" he asked gently. She looked up, her tired face but sharp eyes, as if she was used to protecting herself. "You're Joe?" "Yeah." "Good. Hold the light for me. I'm Aaliyah." Just a few words, but the way she spoke, firm, no nonsense, caught Jared's attention. She was only 18, but her demeanor and behavior suggested she had grown up too quickly. As he held the light, Jared glanced at the tools she was using. Cracked sockets, rusty pliers, misaligned teeth. A broken screwdriver still sat in the toolbox, a living proof of all the replacement requests that had been ruthlessly denied. "This tool is dangerous," Jared said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. Aaliyah smirked, not in a joyful way, but in the way someone who's grown accustomed to mistreatment does. "I know, but when I reported it, they said, just make do until the new batch comes in. It's been 5 months. At that moment, Jared didn't just feel angry, he felt ashamed. His company had once prided itself on being a place that treated workers like family. Yet, beneath all the oil and grease, people like Aaliyah were suffering every day, in the silence of the entire system. Before he could say anything further, a shout rang out from the office. "Hi, Leah, get your ass up. The car's been waiting for hours." Ray Dawson appeared in the doorway, his face red, pointing at her as if she were a child. Then he turned to Jared. "And you, what are you standing there for? Clean up the place. This isn't a chit-chat spot." Jared clenched his fists, blood rushing to his temples. But he couldn't reveal himself. Not yet. His anger had to be kept in check. So the truth could come out. And he thought to himself, "Pete Ray, you won't expect that right here, in this garage. A small black girl will be the one to open the door to Judgment Day." Jared stood silently, watching the young girl continue her work, his mind swirling with thoughts. Aaliyah Thompson, the name she had just mentioned in a flat, expressionless voice, was the complete opposite of the irresponsibility and cruelty that Ray Dawson had just shown. In that moment, Jared realized the true heart of this garage was beating under the layers of oil and grease of this girl, not from Ray's filthy office. She continued tightening bolts, her gaze fixed on the engine as if nothing else in the world mattered. But Jared realized it wasn't focus, it was self-defense. Every movement she made was fast, precise, but not rushed. It was as though she had grown accustomed to doing more than what was needed, and enduring more than was fair. "Are you new here?" Jared asked, as if asking something simple, unimportant. She paused for just a second, then nodded, not looking at him. "Number? I've been here for almost 8 months." 8 months? Someone as young as you working with such heavy stuff? "I don't have a choice," she replied, now glancing at him with a sharp, direct look. "I'm saving up for an auto mechanic school. My mom can't afford the tuition. As for me, I just need enough to buy the books and a laptop." Jared's throat went dry. In his life, most people who wanted to learn had the opportunity. Aaliyah, however, was carrying the weight of dreams on shoulders that hadn't yet matured, working in a place that couldn't care less about her survival. Her left hand trembled slightly as she gripped the socket's head, the skin near her thumb torn and bleeding. A small but deep cut, probably from slipping with the wrench a few days ago. No band-aids, no gloves, just an injury that continued to open with each day on the job. "Have you told the manager?" Jared asked, his eyes still on the wound. "I did," she answered quickly, as though it was a rehearsed response. "They said the warehouse is running low on supplies. Told me to borrow from someone else. But everyone keeps their tools like their wallets. Once, I asked Vince to borrow a 14mm wrench. He laughed and said, 'Work extra hours if you want it.'" Jared clenched his jaw. Vince, the one standing across the garage, leaning against the tool cabinet, scrolling on his phone like he was at home, was the embodiment of the corrupt culture Pete and Ray had fostered, a place where young people were exploited, bullied, and abandoned, while the lazy ones were rewarded with silence and positions of power. Jared bent down, trying to help Aaliyah loosen the strap under the car, but she raised her hand to stop him. "You don't need to help me," she said. "If they see, they'll say I'm relying on the new guy." "I'm just holding the light," Jared replied, taking the LED light and shining it on the engine mount. She looked up at him once more, no smile, no gratitude, just an inquisitive glance, as if wondering whether this man was truly a teammate or just another shadow that would disappear after the shift. The pneumatic wrench squealed in bay number 2. Vince was still standing in his spot while an elderly customer lightly tapped the front desk, but no one answered. The front desk was empty, no employees, no signs. The customer knocked twice more, clearly having waited for a while. Aaliyah shook her head slightly, still not letting go of the wrench, her arm stiff from the final bolt. "That guy's been here since morning. The car just needs a new belt, I'm done. Just waiting for Vince to tell him to pick up the car, but he doesn't care. It's not his shift, that's what he said." "Did you tell Ray?" Jared asked, trying to keep his anger in check. "Ray just said, 'That's the receptionist's job. If the receptionist is off, leave it. That's it.'" Sweat began to soak through Jared's shirt, not from the temperature, but from anger. Not just because of Vince's laziness or Ray's authoritarianism, but because of an entire system of silence and blame-shifting, where a teenage girl had to work with broken tools, in hazardous conditions, and was still treated like she was invisible. "Father?" Jared thought quietly to himself. If you saw this, you'd tear this place apart. Aaliyah stretched, trying to tighten the final bolt. It clicked into place. She pulled her hand away and sighed. And that was when Jared noticed it. Her eyes, tired, but still not devoid of hope. No one should have eyes like that at 18. No one should live with bloodied hands and dreams deferred every single day. But she was living like that, and never once complaining. And in that moment Jared knew she wasn't the one who needed help. She was the one who deserved the chance to change everything. Jared watched Aaliyah bend down to tighten the final bolt, her back slightly trembling, her left wrist straining to hold the cracked tool, a loose wrench, its handle wrapped with silver duct tape. With every turn, it wasn't just the metal being tightened, but the fatigue that was tightening around this young girl. "Aren't you afraid of getting hurt?" Jared asked softly, trying to keep his voice calm, though inside he was boiling. Aaliyah let out a light laugh, a laugh as if squeezed out of a hardened soul. "Afraid? What for? No one here cares if you're scared." The response wasn't sad, nor angry. It was just empty. And that emptiness was what sent a chill down Jared's spine. A young person like her should have been taught, protected, encouraged. But here she was existing like a broken machine, just going on because she had no other choice. Jared took a step back, glancing around the garage. In just an hour, he had seen enough to know that this entire system was rotting from the inside out. In the left corner, Tyler, the 19-year-old white apprentice, was wiping oil under the chassis of an SUV, his hand shaking as he held a dirty rag. Jared noticed the dull look in his eyes. Hunger. He hadn't eaten since morning. No lunch, no water, no right to stop. At the front desk, a middle-aged customer stood confused, looking around, the old appointment slip crumpled in his hand. He couldn't understand why no one was explaining anything. No one was at the counter. No one would answer the simple question, "Is my car done yet?" And worse, it was the way Ray Dawson, the on-site manager, calmly talked on the phone in his office, letting everyone fend for themselves in chaos. Each loud thud of the hydraulic hammer echoed in Jared's head. Each sound of steel scraping against steel was like a bell tolling. Every bolt Aaliyah tightened, with bloodied hands and broken tools, was a reminder that he had been absent for too long. And the trust his father had built was being trampled right under the Foster nameplate. Aaliyah straightened up, wincing from the strain. She glanced at the wall clock and quickly began packing her tools. "Gotta speed up. If that car's late, Ray will dock my shift." "Dock your shift?" Jared asked, thinking he must have misheard. "Yeah, no such thing as overload here. If you're late with a car, it's 30 minutes off your pay. That's Ray's internal policy." She emphasized the last phrase with a bitter smirk. Jared saw clearly. She wasn't saying this to complain. She was saying it so others wouldn't expect justice in this place. At that moment, Ray walked out of the office, his footsteps echoing sharply on the concrete floor like a threat. "Aaliyah, what are you still sitting there for? The Altima at Bay 3's waiting, or should I walk you over myself?" "Yes," she answered shortly, quickly walking away without a glance back. Jared stood there, his chest heavy. He had seen enough, but he knew that if he walked away right now, he would be just another coward who saw the pain and turned away like everyone else. He needed to know more. He needed to understand better, not just to punish Ray or Pete, but to know who truly deserved to stay and who needed to be erased from the system his father had built. As Ray turned his back and walked back to his office, Jared noticed him glance at Aaliyah. His gaze not just filled with the irritation of a boss. It carried a toxic contempt, full of prejudice, a contempt not aimed at her skill, but at her skin color and her age. And in that moment, Jared swore to himself, no one like Aaliyah would ever have to live with those looks again. Not in the company that bore the Foster name. Not while he still stood here. Ray Dawson's shout echoed through the workshop, like the roar of a wild animal guarding its territory. Not a reminder, but a power strike to the spirits of those working here. Aaliyah, hurry up. That car's been waiting for over an hour. Are you planning to let the customer sleep here? Jared turned just in time to see Aaliyah flinch and drop the flashlight onto the ground. She bent down to pick it up, her lips tightly pressed together, not a word spoken. She wasn't scared, but she was clearly used to being treated like a number instead of a person. Ray brushed past Jared, the smell of sweat and cold cigarettes mingling with the sharp, cheap cologne that seemed to match his voice. And you, Joe, you think you're here to flirt or something? Pick up that mop and clean the oil spill at your feet. Or do you want me to teach you what labor is? The words spat out like a slap. Jared clenched his jaw, trying to suppress his reaction. He had no idea who he was speaking to. He didn't know that the man he was insulting was the son of the man who had built the empire he was using to survive. Got it, I'll do it right away, Jared replied flatly, lowering his voice just enough to hide the anger boiling inside him. He bent down to pick up the mop, his rough Joe hands now the eyes of CEO Jared Foster. Each streak of oil he cleaned was living proof of the brokenness in the management culture, how trust had been corrupted, values twisted, and people were being drained to the bone. Ray's behavior wasn't a coincidence. It was the result of unchecked power. In the way he yelled at Aaliyah, mocked Tyler, disrespected customers, and suppressed his subordinates, Jared saw a model of management rotting to its core. Ray wasn't just a bad person. He was the truest reflection of everything Jared had overlooked during his time managing from afar. A loud knock on the office door echoed again. A middle-aged customer was trying to get help. No one responded. Ray turned back and shouted, "Where's the receptionist? I saw her drinking Red Bull last night. Is she stuck in the bathroom or what?" No one answered. The elderly woman sitting in the waiting area shrank back, her eyes avoiding as if afraid to become the next target. Jared kept his head down, mopping the floor, but his ears caught every piece of conversation behind him. "That new kid looks dumb. He won't last a week. Who cares? Ray will fire him. He can't stand weakness." "Yeah, but little Aaliyah, that girl knows how to work. But if Ray hates someone, he'll make sure they suffer." The whispered words between the technicians sounded like silent sentences being carried out every day. The victims were silent. The perpetrators mocked. The witnesses just remained quiet, as if accepting the suffering was the only way to survive. The office door swung open again. Ray came out, this time with a cup of coffee in his hand. Relaxed, as if he were at a bar, he glanced at the clock, then looked over at Jared. "Joe, put that mop down. Go help Vince with the Camry in the back. If you scratch the paint, I'll dock half your shift." Vince was standing by the car, holding his phone, not bothering to look up. A lazy, entitled, and awful person, to the point that Jared felt sorry for the oil on his hands. And then Jared understood. Ray wasn't the only problem. Vince was a link in this broken chain. People like Vince existed because Ray allowed it, and Ray existed because Pete covered for him, and Pete existed because Jared had stepped back, thinking managing from a distance was enough. Jared swallowed his anger. Not because he was weak, but because he knew that if his anger erupted, the Joe Daniels facade would crack. And that now was not the time. He needed to see everything clearly. He needed to witness the rot at the root of the system his father had built with his own hands and trust. He turned back to look at Aaliyah at the far end of the workshop. She was leaning on her knee, breathing heavily but not stopping, not complaining, not giving up. In a place where mistreatment was considered the rule, that young black girl was still working with whatever dignity she had left. And Jared silently promised, "You won't be alone much longer." As Jared slowly stood up after nearly an hour of kneeling to clean the floor, his back ached sharply. But it didn't compare to the scene before him. In a hidden corner near the spare parts storage, Aaliyah was struggling to balance while lifting a heavy barrel of motor oil off the shelf. She leaned too far, her right leg buckling noticeably, her face contorting with the effort. Jared walked over trying to maintain his composure. "What's wrong with your leg?" Aaliyah bit her lip, not looking at him. "I slipped a few days ago, just a mild sprain." "Then why don't you take a few days off to rest?" Her response came out in a laugh, a dry, harsh sound like metal scraping against concrete. "Take time off, and I lose a shift. Lose a shift, and I can't pay for school at the end of the month. Ray doesn't give unpaid time off with hours intact. He's made it clear. Take a break, and you're off the schedule for good." Jared's fists clenched. This wasn't a company. This was a chain of buildings where people's worth was measured by productivity and blind obedience. He glanced at Tyler, the 19-year-old skinny with messy, uncombed curls. He was leaning against a concrete pillar, hastily chewing on a small sandwich, as though afraid someone might see. And as Jared had guessed, Ray appeared, this time like a ghost stepping out of the workshop smoke. "Tyler, what are you eating at a time like this? Get the car out of Bay 4. Tyler jumped, dropping half his sandwich onto the floor. He bent down to pick it up, muttering, "I've only been eating for 3 minutes." Ray stepped forward, snatching the food from Tyler's hands and tossing it into the nearby trash can, his voice as sharp as steel. "This is a garage, not a buffet. If you can't get it done, then leave." The young man stepped back, his eyes red but not daring to protest. Jared took a step toward Ray, the urge to intervene rising within him, but then he stopped. Not because of fear, but because he needed more than a rash reaction. He needed evidence. He needed this entire system to expose itself before he could reveal it. Jared turned away, his eyes scanning the workshop. And for the first time since entering, he began to notice something he hadn't before. No one was talking to each other except to give orders. There were no smiles, no jokes, no empathy. Only the screech of metal, the sound of compressors, and the silence of those who had learned to live under the brutal rule. If you're weak, you're erased. In the corner of the office, Vince Morgan, the veteran technician, leaned against the tool cabinet, one hand holding his phone, the other lazily tapping on the desk, his eyes not even glancing at the customer knocking patiently at the door. The customer stood there, clutching the key, trying to find someone to ask about the Ford Escape that had been dropped off for repairs the day before. Jared approached. "Is the Escape out front for that customer?" "Yeah, finished it yesterday." "So why don't you call him to pick it up?" "Not my shift." A blunt answer, devoid of guilt or responsibility. Jared looked Vince straight in the eyes. There was nothing there except laziness being indulged, and a swollen ego knowing that here no one dared fire anyone. No one besides Jared truly cared whether a car was returned on time. No one except Aaliyah and Tyler saw the customer as a person, not a problem. Each small action, tossing food, cutting shifts, shifting blame, despising the young, openly being lazy, was a brick building the tiered wall where Aaliyah and Tyler were slowly being buried every day. Jared turned his head to look at Aaliyah. She was still working, her hand gripping a tool stained with dry blood, her right leg limping but not stopping. And for the first time since entering this place, he no longer saw her as just a mechanic. She was the question mark for this entire system. A big question that no one dared answer, but Jared would. That entire afternoon, Jared struggled to keep his composure, holding back the emotions that were rising in his throat, threatening to explode. He had witnessed firsthand how young people like Aaliyah and Tyler were being drained of their energy. He had heard too many cruel words and witnessed the extreme laziness of Vince, the indifference of the entire system here. But then, when the elderly woman walked in, every limit inside Jared began to crack. The old rusty minivan stopped in front of the garage door. It was a Dodge Caravan, its side dented, and the rear tire looked like it might go flat at any moment. From the vehicle, an elderly woman with thin gray hair and a hunched back slowly stepped out with visible difficulty. She carried a weathered leather purse, her left hand trembling slightly as she gripped the car door. Jared immediately recognized her as not a regular customer. Her face was humble, reserved. The kind of customer his father used to always say, "You have to help them. Serve them with all your heart. People like them are the reason we open the garage every morning." She walked toward the front desk, where no one was present, and lightly tapped the surface of the counter, waiting. Jared, standing near the repair area, watched her every small movement. After a moment, when no one responded, she turned to a nearby technician and quietly asked, "Excuse me, could someone check my back tire? I think it's flat, but I'm too afraid to drive far." The technician pointed toward the office. "Ask the manager, he's in there." So she continued her slow walk. Her steps led her toward the office door, where Ray Dawson sat with his feet propped up on the desk, holding a coffee cup, grinning as he talked on the phone. He saw her, but didn't stand up. Only when she stood in front of the door, her soft voice called out, "Excuse me. My car has a flat tire. Could you—" Ray cut her off, his voice loud enough for the entire garage to hear, as if intentionally making sure everyone could hear. "Flat tire? Just pump it, lady. What are you hanging around the office door for? Are you trying to get a free repair?" The old woman paused for a moment, her face turning red, but she still replied softly, No, I just wanted to ask because I've been waiting for more than 2 hours, and no one has asked." Ray leaned his elbows on the desk, his mouth curling into a sneer. His voice rang clear, dripping with disdain. "That piece of junk isn't worth repairing. The repair cost could be more than the car's value. You should spend your money on bread instead." The atmosphere suddenly thickened. A few technicians exchanged glances. Aaliyah, who was struggling to pull an oil filter from beneath a car, froze. Her head dropped lower, her shoulders stiffened. Tyler, from the corner of the garage, stood motionless, holding a mop like time itself had stopped. The old woman didn't say anything. She stood there for a few seconds, then lowered her head. Her hands trembled as she gripped her purse tighter. Then she turned and walked out, her back more hunched than when she entered. The minivan's engine sputtered weakly, and it slowly drove away from the garage. Jared could no longer take it. He didn't shout. He didn't rush to throw punches. He just silently and slowly began unbuttoning his oil-stained uniform. 1, then 2. The atmosphere in the garage began to shift, as if everyone could sense something was about to happen. When he pulled off the faded gray shirt, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath, his gaze had turned so cold that even Vince put down his phone. Jared stepped to the center of the garage, where the fluorescent lights shone down on him from above. The sound of metal clashing, machinery, and casual laughter. All of it suddenly stopped. A strange silence spread. He turned to face Ray. "I'm Jared Foster." Ray blinked, as if he didn't understand what he was hearing. Jared lowered his voice, but the tone was clear, each word cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm the founder and the owner of this garage system, and I've heard, seen, and had enough." All movement stopped. Aaliyah dropped the screwdriver to the floor. It rolled a few circles before stopping. Tyler took a step back, his eyes wide. Vince dropped his phone. The whole garage seemed frozen in time. Ray stood there, frozen, his face draining of color, then slowly turning red with a mix of embarrassment and rage. "What did you say?" he snarled, taking a step forward. Jared didn't back down. He pulled a brown leather wallet from his back pocket, opened it, and held up his CEO badge along with the business registration of Henry Foster and Son LLC. Under the bright light, his name was clearly visible. "I left Pete in charge of this system. I trusted Ray to be appointed because of his abilities. But it turns out," Jared glanced around, "what I see here is a collection of people being drained, insulted, exploited, while people like you sit on power and spit on the values of this company." Ray opened his mouth, about to say something, but Jared cut him off. "You're fired, effective immediately. No notice, no explanation." Ray took a step back, his face pale. "You can't do this." "I just did." Jared turned to Vince. "And you too, get out of this garage. Now." Vince said nothing. He slunk away, grabbing his jacket, walking past everyone like a shadow exposed in the daylight. No one said a word. No one clapped. No one cheered. But the silence now was no longer out of fear. It was a sigh of relief. Jared turned back to Aaliyah. She was still standing there, her face stunned, sweat running down her cheek, but her eyes were lit up. "You take the rest of today off. Go home. Paid leave. Don't argue." She nodded slightly, her lips trembling. Jared turned to Tyler. "Go get something to eat, the company will cover it, and come back whenever you want." Tyler didn't reply, but Jared saw him nod, his fist clenched tightly behind his back, trying to hide the tear that was beginning to well up. Jared stood in the middle of the garage, his uniform lying beneath him like an old shell being shed. This was the moment for everything to start over. From the beginning, from dignity, from humanity. The air in the garage felt thick, like oil smoke trapped beneath a low ceiling. The sound of the ID badges clinking together echoed as Jared closed his wallet, the motion decisive, as though drawing a line between the past deceit and the responsibility that had to begin now. All eyes were fixed on the center of the workshop, where Ray Dawson had just retreated, like a ghost expelled from the world he had once ruled with shouts and threats. In the far left corner, Pete Wallace, the regional manager, who had long overseen Ray from afar and enjoyed the privilege of being beyond criticism, appeared at the worst possible moment. He entered the garage with his usual overconfidence, a smug smile, neatly pressed khaki pants, and a dark-colored shirt rolled up at the sleeves, as if this entire place was a stage and he was the star. Perhaps Ray had urgently called him before his escape. Perhaps Pete thought he could salvage the situation, like he always did. "What's going on here?" Pete asked loudly, his voice trying to stay calm, but it was clear he was starting to tremble. Jared didn't turn immediately. He picked up the mechanic's shirt lying at his feet, folded it neatly, and placed it on the tool bench, as if bidding farewell to the past. Then he turned to face Pete, his eyes cold as granite. "Pete Wallace," he said slowly, as if reading an indictment. You're fired, effective immediately." Pete raised an eyebrow. At first, he was stunned. Then he laughed. "You? Kidding me? I'm the one keeping this entire system running. If you think you can—" Jared cut him off with a simple gesture. He pulled out his CEO ID and held it up. The workshop lights shone on the badge, illuminating the bold lettering. Jared Foster, Chief Executive Officer, under the Foster & Son Automotive logo. "Not kidding, this is the truth. You don't have the authority to do this without the board's approval. I am the board. I'm the sole owner. And I just witnessed you abusing employees, protecting terrible subordinates, and allowing customers to be humiliated. I have every right, and more importantly, I have reason." Pete's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. His lips twitched, his eyes darted around, as if expecting an ally, someone to speak up against Jared. But no one said a word, not a single glance of support. Everyone avoided eye contact, either bowing their heads or looking toward Jared, the man who had unmasked the entire system in just an hour. Vince Morgan, now standing by the wall, his shoulder bag hanging low, looked as confused as a student called to the front of the class without having studied. Jared didn't let him slip away. "Vince." He didn't need to say anything else. "I get it," Vince muttered, his eyes dropping, and then he quietly walked toward the door. Each step felt like it tore apart the memories of when he casually scrolled through his phone while his colleagues sweated and bled. The iron door clicked shut behind him with a sharp clink, like the final nail in the coffin of a rotting era. A long silence followed. The garage was eerily quiet now. No more screeching machines, no more shouting, no more cursing. But this wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of awakening. As if, for the first time, everyone left in the garage could see the light seeping through the cracks of a system they once thought was unchangeable. Aaliyah stood beside the car lift, her eyes fixed on Jared. Her back was still straight, her right leg still trembling from the sprain that wasn't healed, but her eyes, those eyes hollow from lack of sleep and exhaustion, now shone with an unprecedented look. Hope. Tyler quietly walked up to Jared, his eyes full of tears but his voice steady. "We didn't think you would actually come back." Jared placed a hand on his shoulder. "I shouldn't have left in the first place." He turned to look at the rest of the team. Now, less than half of them compared to this morning. But these were the ones who still had enough integrity to bow their heads silently in the face of wrongdoing, instead of clapping in support. "I know you don't believe in empty words," Jared spoke. "So, I won't promise. I'll act. Starting tomorrow, we'll begin again, step by step. I'll bring in a new manager, someone I trust. For now, the garage will close for 3 days to clean up, repair, and restock the equipment. Everyone will get paid for their full shift. No one will lose wages." A small wave passed through the technicians. It wasn't cheers, but the way they sighed, how their shoulders relaxed, their eyes softened, it all showed that they were beginning to believe that something better was truly possible. Angela Ruiz, the veteran operations expert whom Jared had worked with in a past system overhaul, was on her way to the garage. Jared knew that when she arrived, every last mask would be peeled away, and people like Aaliyah and Tyler would no longer have to silently endure behind these old oil-stained doors. Jared took a deep breath. The garage was still dirty, the machines still old, the walls still yellowed. But for the first time in many years, its foundation had been shaken. He looked toward the iron door where Vince had just left, then turned back inside, where Aaliyah stood, her hand lightly resting on her knee, tired but not broken. And he knew The storm that had just passed wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, light drizzle gently spread across the cracked asphalt in front of garage number 3, creating cold, gray streaks like the lingering aftershock of a storm that had just swept away the 2 managers who once ruled here with tyranny. But this time, in front of the garage, there was no silence of resignation, only a silence full of anticipation, taut like a guitar string. Jared arrived early, wearing a simple raincoat, standing with his arms crossed in front of the door. Beside him, Angela Ruiz stepped out of a newly arrived white sedan. She wore black trousers and a dark blazer, her figure neat, her angular face calm but with sharp eyes that conveyed poise and decisiveness. There was no need for introductions. One glance from her was enough to make it clear she was not here to ask questions. She was here to act. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly. Jared nodded. "You're the one I trust most, Angela. They need someone who not only knows how to rebuild, but also knows how to listen." Angela nodded slightly and stepped through the door, a laptop and a file folder tucked under her arm, vibrating slightly with each step. Inside, the garage was still chaotic. Oil still pooled in a few corners, tools were scattered about, but more importantly, the people were still here. Aaliyah, Tyler, and a few other veteran technicians hadn't abandoned their posts after the earthquake. Angela spread the documents across the table and turned on her computer. She didn't speak much, didn't hold a meeting, just said one line. One by one, start with the little girl. Her gaze turned toward Aaliyah. Both Jared and Angela understood. If they wanted to know the truth, they had to listen to those at the bottom. Aaliyah stepped forward, limping slightly because her ankle wasn't fully healed, but her head held high. She was no longer the timid girl from yesterday. Something inside her had changed. A small crack in her resignation had been replaced with a straight line called belief. Angela pulled out a chair and invited Aaliyah to sit. No pens, no recording devices. Just, tell me everything, no judgment, no punishment. Aaliyah looked at Jared for a moment, saw him nod, and then began speaking. Her voice was initially soft even, but as the memories that had been choking her for months began pouring out, they came flooding like water breaking a dam. I asked for a new wrench 3 times. Twice I wrote requests. The last time I had to use a pencil because the ink ran out. Ray threw my request in the trash, saying I was acting up because I'm new. I asked for a new rag, and he said, "Use an old shirt." When I sprained my ankle, I texted to say I'd take a day off. He called back and said, "If you take time off, don't bother showing up next week." Angela quietly jotted down a few lines. She didn't interrupt. One time I worked overtime until almost 9 p.m. No one acknowledged it. Vince left at 5, saying, "Not my shift." When I asked about overtime pay, Ray said, "Not approved yet." She paused, then pulled a crumpled folded paper from her front pocket. An equipment replacement request form, the ink smudged from oil stains. Angela took it, unfolded it, and nodded. Was anyone else treated like this? Tyler. He's newer, so it's worse for him. One time he asked for a 10-minute breakfast break, and Ray threw his sandwich in the trash. We were threatened with shift cuts all the time. Angela closed the laptop. Her eyes softened a little, but her voice was sharper than ever. "You are the heart of this team." Aaliyah flinched. "Me? Not because you can tighten bolts quickly, but because you still have dignity in a place where dignity is considered a luxury. You work until you bleed without cursing the world. You endure humiliation without losing your professional ethics. That's something no training program can teach." The young girl looked at Angela, her eyes welling up. Not because of the pain, but because for the first time in 8 months, someone believed she deserved to be heard. Angela turned back, calling to Jared. This girl cannot be lost. She has to be the one to keep the fire going. Jared nodded without hesitation. I will make sure of that. In the next few hours, Angela interviewed the rest. Tyler, who had had his meal thrown away by Ray. Marcus, the silent technician who always stayed late to clean the storeroom. Dee, the older mechanic who was scolded by Vince just for asking for new wiring. Each story intertwined like threads, exposing the rot that had wormed its way through every crack in the system. By the end of the day, Angela had completed her report. She stood in front of Jared, tapping lightly on the thick file. This is the dissection of the nervous system of this garage. And the conclusion? Keep Aaliyah and Tyler. Retrain Marcus. Let go of Dee, not because he's bad, but because he no longer has the strength to keep up, and hire 2 new technicians immediately. But most importantly, she placed her hand on the file, her gaze stern. Aaliyah must be made the interim technical team leader. No one in this garage can be trusted like her. Jared stood silently, not out of hesitation, but because he was moved. He looked toward Aaliyah. She was still kneeling, wiping down the tool cabinet, though no one had asked her to. She was still working. Because she believed this place could be better. And Jared knew. This was no longer about restructuring. This was about giving back justice to those who deserved to rise, not stay on their knees. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the oily glass of the garage door, casting long, faded streaks on the cold concrete floor, tracing the tired footprints left behind. Jared stood by the tool bench, listening to Angela's report on the results of the interviews. Though he had been through larger overhauls before, this time, right here, at the place that bore his father's name, every comment felt like a slow but precise incision into his skin. Angela closed the file and lightly tapped her fingers on the corner of the folder, as if weighing each word carefully. Then she looked directly at Jared. Marcus and Dee. Both are not just lazy. They have a contemptuous attitude toward customers. They cut corners on safety procedures, and most importantly, there's not a shred of remorse. Jared frowned. He had hoped that the remaining people would at least offer a glimmer of light, an opportunity. But the truth wouldn't let him lull himself to sleep. Are you sure? Marcus admitted he intentionally installed the wrong brakes on a Civic because the customer was rude. Dee sat playing on his phone during a compressor check, and when I asked why, he just laughed. Who cares? He said. That answer says it all. Jared tightened his grip on the pen in his hand. They had their chance, and they chose to betray it. He stepped out of the temporary office. Outside, the garage was still bustling. Tyler was organizing the tools. Aaliyah was showing a new apprentice how to adjust tire pressure. And in the corner near the supplies, Marcus and Dee stood idly, not touching a thing the entire afternoon. Jared walked up to them and stopped in front of the 2 men. We need to talk. Marcus looked up, his eyes still holding that tired defiance, a half-smile curling at the corner of his mouth. What now? Angela told me to take a break, so I did. Are you going to add more humiliation to this? Jared remained unmoved. His voice dropped, not loud, but clear enough to echo throughout the garage. Dumber. I'm not firing you because Angela said so. I'm firing you both for one simple reason. You don't care. Not because you don't know right from wrong, but because you intentionally choose wrong, thinking no one will touch you. He glanced at Dee, who was standing with his arms crossed, a mocking look on his face. This garage is not a prison. But it's not a place for people who disregard the safety of others. You're not being replaced because someone better came along. You're being removed because you chose this path." Marcus scoffed, trying to maintain his arrogance, but the grip he had on his bag strap made it clear that he understood. The door was closing, and it wouldn't be opening again. Dee spat out a bitter remark. "I thought the new boss would be different. Turns out you're just another guy who likes to throw people into the pit." Jared responded, his gaze never leaving them. "I didn't push you down, I just didn't pull you up after you stomped on someone else's hands." No one contradicted him. There was nothing left to argue, and as they turned their backs, the rain began to fall, the cold droplets hitting their shoulders like they were washing away the last remnants of their arrogance. They walked away in silence, their steps hesitant, not out of regret, but because for the first time in many years, they could no longer lean on anyone to blame themselves. Jared stood still, watching them go. His hands remained relaxed, but his eyes fixed on the door that had just closed. He didn't feel joy. He didn't feel victorious. This wasn't a game. This was the necessary severance, like a rotten root that had to be removed so that new sprouts could grow. Tyler stepped up to him, his hands still covered in oil, but his eyes were different from the day before. The constant fear was gone, replaced with a hesitant but genuine belief. "Jared, how many of us are left now?" Jared looked around. The garage now only had Aaliyah, Tyler, and a new apprentice. 3 people, a vacant space, but in that space, there were real people. "Few," Jared answered, "but enough to start over." Not far away, Aaliyah was still working. She didn't look up, but from the glance over her shoulder, Jared saw it clearly. She had heard everything. And she wasn't standing still just because she needed a job, but because, finally, she believed this was a place worth staying. The rain continued to fall gently outside, but inside, for the first time in many months, the garage foundation no longer felt weighed down by the slow decay. Jared exhaled, then walked into the office, where Angela had already started compiling a list of tools that needed replacing. Carefully, systematically, one item at a time. The cleansing was not over, but the most important thing had already happened. The people who remained no longer felt alone in their work. The afternoon rain from the previous day had washed away the old, dusty grime clinging to the Foster & Son garage sign hanging on the brick wall, leaving streaks of water that looked like tears from the time when Jared's father still ran the place with oil-stained hands, but a heart as clean as a flame of righteousness. And today, Jared decided to do something he hadn't done in the 5 years since taking over the company: close down garage number 3. Not because of bankruptcy, but to start over, thoroughly, and from the roots. On the front iron door, a simple sign was taped up with gray duct tape. Closed for 3 days for full restructuring. No customers. All staff will be paid in full. Management. Inside the workshop, there was no sound of roaring engines, no hiss of the air compressor switching on and off. Only the sound of a rag scraping across the floor, pulling old oil stains out of the cracked concrete grooves. And the person doing that wasn't Aaliyah, wasn't Tyler, but Jared himself. Dark t-shirt, old jeans, and safety gloves. There was no sign of the millionaire CEO anymore, just a young man bent over the floor, wiping away the dirt that the managers before him had ignored as if it didn't exist. "You don't have to do this," Angela said from the office door when she saw Jared crouching next to the lift, scrubbing away the rust from the metal edges. Jared looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. "I have to. If I don't bend down and look closely at these oil stains, I'll go back to looking at people with payrolls and revenue reports. And I've been doing that for too long." Angela didn't answer. She just nodded slightly and returned to her task of inventorying the tools. On the other side of the shop, a group of contractors who had just been hired started tearing down the old, leaking roof that had been a problem for months. Every time there was thunder outside, that part of the roof would shake violently, making the whole workshop feel like it might fall apart from worry. Today, the sound of nails, hammers, and drills filled the air, but it didn't feel disruptive. It was the sound of a place being revived. Angela laid out 3 inventory boards, one for the rotting concrete floor, one for the outdated electrical system, which was not up to safety standards, and one for the handheld equipment. More than 30% of the current tools were cracked, bent, or taped together with duct tape. "Jared," she called. "The guest area floor is a slipping hazard. I've called in a team to redo the floor tomorrow morning. The main electrical panel needs all the fuses replaced. There's a risk of short circuits if we keep using it." "Approve everything," he replied without hesitation. "I'm not letting anyone, especially Aaliyah, work another day with that cracked wrench set." Angela paused, looking at him for a long moment. "You really think about that girl a lot?" Jared nodded. "Because she's the last thing this place has left to believe in." In the far corner, Aaliyah was showing Tyler how to identify a clogged oil line, even though both had been given the day off. But they didn't leave. Not for the money, but because this place, for the first time, felt like it truly belonged to them. The whole afternoon passed with the sound of tapping, chiseling, and the smell of cleaning chemicals. Angela moved quickly around the areas, making note of each spot that needed fixing, while Jared handled each old stain like a quiet act of redemption. By evening, the workshop was almost unrecognizable. The old metal trash bins had been cleared out, and the new safety notice signs had been posted. Even the neon light in front had been replaced, the new bright white light replacing the dim, warehouse-like glow that once dominated. Aaliyah sat on the bench by the wall, her foot wrapped in bandages, but her expression lighter than ever. Tyler brought over 2 cans of cold drinks, handing them to Jared and Angela. No one said anything, but the atmosphere had changed. There were no longer shouts, no more cautious glances, just silence and working together, like a real team. As night fell, Jared and Angela were the last ones to leave the shop. He locked the door, standing in the middle of the oil-streaked concrete yard, looking up at the newly re-roofed garage. The white light from the sign reflected off his shirt. Clean, no longer stained with oil. "We're tearing it down to rebuild," Jared whispered. Angela nodded. "And this time, we're building on trust, not revenue reports." The night wind blew through, carrying the scent of metal, fresh plastic, and hope. Jared turned his back on the garage, knowing that when that door opened 3 days later, it would no longer just be a repair shop. It would be a place where people could stand tall, work with their hands, and be treated like human beings. 3 days later, on a cool morning, the sun broke through the thick clouds, casting a golden streak of light across the newly coated, non-slip concrete floor of garage number 3. The Foster & Son Garage sign now gleamed brighter than ever. No longer a dusty relic of the past, but a new promise of respect, of honor, and of a rebirth no one ever thought possible. Jared arrived early. He stepped out of the old pickup truck that had been with him throughout this transformation, stopping in front of the garage like the first sentry of a life-changing shift. The roll-up door opened slowly, and light poured in. The first thing that caught his eye was not the machinery, nor the expensive equipment, but the immaculate cleanliness. The floor, which had once been caked with thick black oil, now reflected light like a dull mirror. Safety lines in red, yellow, and green clearly marked areas for repairs, checks, maintenance, and customer service. Along the walls, new regulation boards, safety instructions, and first aid procedures were all neatly mounted. Not just for show, but each one was laminated, waterproof, and had QR codes for staff to scan for more information. The tool area was completely reorganized. Every wrench, spanner, screwdriver, torquey wrench, and electronic sensor set had its own tag and designated storage space. And most importantly, everyone had their own new set of tools. No more cracked, taped-up tools or borrowing from others. The first footsteps echoed behind Jared. He turned around. Aaliyah. She walked into the garage wearing her new uniform, a dark blue shirt with the Foster & Son logo embroidered in white on her left chest. Her sleeves were neatly rolled up, her left wrist wrapped in black protective fabric. Her right ankle was still wrapped in bandages, but she walked with a completely different posture. No longer with her head down. No longer with fearful eyes. "You look better," Jared said quietly. Aaliyah nodded, placing her new toolkit on the table and gently pulling the zipper, as if she still couldn't believe it was hers. "I don't have to fight to survive every morning anymore." A truck stopped at the door. Tyler stepped out, his hair still messy but his face glowing. He wore the same uniform as Aaliyah, carrying a bag and a breakfast box. He entered, looking around, eyes wide. Is this for real?" Jared smiled, standing between them, arms crossed. "We're not just fixing the garage. We're fixing how people are treated. This is no longer just my garage. This is ours." Aaliyah looked at Jared, then back at the workshop, now covered in its new skin. She reached out and touched the shiny metal beam on the car lift, where once there had been an old, rusted one that had cut her hands. "This has never happened," she said quietly. "From now on it will be the norm," Jared replied. "And you're the one who will make sure it continues." The back door of the garage opened. Angela walked in, holding 2 files and a clipboard. She wore a white shirt, a gray skirt, and safety shoes. No one would dare underestimate a woman like her in the middle of an auto shop anymore, because Angela was the one who turned blueprints into reality. "The checklist is ready. The scheduled maintenance plan has been emailed to everyone. I'll oversee the shifts for the next 2 weeks until the new technical team leader is officially recognized." Jared nodded. "I've made my decision. That person is Aaliyah." Aaliyah looked up, as if shocked by an electric jolt. "Me? But I've only been here for 8 months, but you're the only one who stayed. You've learned everything with blood, sweat, and dignity. You deserve this." Angela nodded and handed her a file. "Here's the training schedule for team leaders. You'll participate during working hours with pay. We'll also send an evaluation to the regional HR system. This isn't temporary. It's an official promotion path." Aaliyah didn't say anything. She simply took the file with both hands. Her face didn't break into a big smile, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that came with knowing she had a bigger responsibility, but also that she had been recognized. The morning passed with a new rhythm. Jared didn't enter the meeting room as usual. He stood outside with Angela, observing. And for the first time, every customer who walked in was welcomed not with the usual endurance attitude, but with grateful eyes. An elderly man came to check the strange noise in his truck's engine. Aaliyah listened to the description, wrote it on the whiteboard, and then turned to Tyler to check the exhaust. Tyler spoke up. "If there's no issue, I'd suggest checking the spark plugs and fuel system. The truck seems to be sputtering." Aaliyah nodded, making space for him to work. Every movement went smoothly. No one was yelled at, no one was ignored. By the end of the day, Jared held a short team meeting in the break room, which had just been repainted, with a new coffee machine and a whiteboard for anonymous staff suggestions. Today is day 1, Jared said, his eyes focused on Aaliyah and Tyler. Tomorrow will not be easier, but it will be better. No one will go against the new values without paying the price. He looked at each person. Who violates safety? Out the door. Who disrespects customers? Out the door. But those who deserve it, they will be lifted, not by words, but by actions. For a moment, every eye was on him. No more doubt, no more hesitation, but agreement. The garage had been reborn. Not because of new paint or a new floor, but because for the first time people finally felt respected as human beings. In the early days after reopening, Jared didn't expect a long line of customers waiting outside the garage. He knew that trust, once lost, had to be rebuilt brick by brick, and the customers were the ones who would test the quality of each brick. But by the third morning, when the silver SUV stopped in front of the door, the window rolled down, and a middle-aged woman's voice rang out. "I heard there's a new manager here, is that true?" Aaliyah, who was cleaning the work schedule board, looked up and walked toward the woman, moving gently yet decisively. "Hello, yes. We've just overhauled the entire system. How can we assist you with your car?" The woman looked her up and down, her gaze still holding some suspicion, a reflex from months of bad service. But then, seeing Aaliyah standing upright, her uniform neat, her gaze calm and direct, the woman nodded. "My car shakes when I stop at a red light. I'm not sure if it's the ignition system. I'll check it carefully and report back. If needed, we can provide a replacement vehicle free of charge while we repair it." The answer, clear, professional, and unpretentious, made the woman pause for a moment. Then she nodded. "That's much better than the last time I came here." And somehow, one customer turned into 2, then 3. By the end of the week, the appointments were nearly full. Customers who had sworn never to return to that messy place quietly left their cars and sat in the waiting area, now equipped with clean seats, an air purifier, and even a flyer outlining customer rights. Jared stood behind the glass partition, watching Aaliyah work without intervening. She didn't need guidance. She was leading. Every morning, she prioritized the cars, those needing urgent brake checks, those waiting for parts, and those just for routine maintenance. There were no scenes of employees fighting over tasks, no one person handling 3 jobs in silence. Tyler now handled all intake and paperwork. He carefully reviewed each repair slip, noting the time, estimated cost, and emailing the copy to the customer. Jared never imagined that the kid who used to be scolded for asking for 5 minutes to eat a sandwich was now handling paperwork more efficiently than many office employees he had hired at headquarters. Once, when an old sedan with a complex engine code appeared, and the diagnostic system couldn't identify the issue, Aaliyah didn't panic. She sat with the customer, pulled out the laptop, and explained the codes from the OBD2 system like a real engineer. It could be the oxygen sensor or the fuel mixture regulator, but we're not guessing. I'll remove the engine head and check the entire air intake system. The customer, not an easy man to please, responded sharply. I've taken this car to 3 other places, and no one found the problem. I can't promise we'll find the answer in 10 minutes, Aaliyah replied calmly. But I promise we won't stop until we find the right one. And it was that certainty, not speed, that convinced the customer to agree. When Jared saw this, he silently wondered, how many other Aaliyahs have I missed in other shops? How many talented people were buried by those sitting in the wrong seats? In the weekend meeting, Jared gathered the team in the break room. Now, with a new Employee of the Month board, a new coffee machine, and a whiteboard with customer feedback written on it. Aaliyah was at the top of the board. 8 out of 8 5-star ratings. One customer wrote, I didn't think a teenage female mechanic could do this well. I was wrong. Tyler followed closely behind. Young receptionist and office manager, but extremely professional. Not a detail missed. Jared entered, holding the newly printed revenue analysis. The chart was still modest, but the curve was no longer descending. It was crawling upward, little by little, through trust. He looked at the team. They were still small in number, but they were a real team. "I don't care who used to be the manager here," Jared said. "From now on, everyone will be judged not by age, title, or degree. Only one standard: who keeps their integrity in every task. Who makes the customers leave feeling respected. That person is the cornerstone." Angela nodded from the back table. "We've rebuilt the foundation. Now it's time to pour the concrete." Aaliyah spoke up, the first time she took the initiative to speak. "Well then, I have a proposal." "Go ahead," Jared replied. "The garage should have an internal training program, so newcomers don't have to swim in the sea of machinery. I'll write the curriculum if needed. I've learned enough mistakes to know that those coming after shouldn't make the same ones." Jared smiled. Tyler softly clapped, even though no one had started it. "Start writing it," Jared said, "and put your name at the bottom." Aaliyah nodded without smiling, because this wasn't the time to celebrate, it was the time to keep building. But in her eyes there was something brighter than a smile. Determination. That day, the old minivan of the elderly woman who had been humiliated by Ray came back. Jared recognized it immediately, but she wasn't alone. She brought her daughter and grandson with her. "My granddaughter wants to learn auto mechanics. She heard me talk about the young woman here, so she came to see who she was." Aaliyah welcomed them, her shirt stained with oil, her face dotted with sweat, but standing tall. Jared didn't intervene. He knew the day Aaliyah became a role model was no longer a distant dream. It was happening. Right here. A week after reopening, Jared called the remaining team together, Aaliyah, Tyler, and 2 new interns, into the break room, which had been updated with leather chairs and a technical bookshelf. The atmosphere in the small room felt different. It was no longer a staff meeting, but a moment of profound change, starting with the people who seemed the smallest. On the round table in the middle of the room, Angela placed new notebooks, soft gray leather covers, with the Foster & Son logo embossed. Each one had the name of the individual on the cover, not numbered. And just under the name, in silver ink, was the phrase, "Respect is the starting point. We don't just fix cars, we heal people." Aaliyah looked at the notebook in front of her as if it were a luxury item in a world where she was only ever allowed to use hand-me-downs. She gently touched the cover, pausing as she turned to the first page. In the soft white light from the ceiling, the printed words stood clear, like a manifesto. "Every worker has the right to be healed, both physically and mentally." Aaliyah's lips quivered slightly. No one spoke, but everyone felt it. Her emotion wasn't weakness. It was the culmination of years of being treated as a tool, now being handed back her dignity. Tyler quickly flipped through the pages, his eyes blinking in disbelief at what he was reading. "Tool allowance every year? Is this for real? Paid overtime, paid sick leave? No cutting shifts without written notice?" Jared nodded, his voice not loud but as solid as a rock. "It's real, and it will always be real." Angela continued, her voice calm yet full of authority. "Every item here is in effect immediately. Not just here but across all Foster & Son facilities. We've sent the template to headquarters to standardize it as company policy." Jared moved to the whiteboard, writing out each item clearly. Paid sick leave, minimum 5 days per year. Personal tool allowance $500 per year, or more if justified. No employee will be penalized for reporting violations. Any reduction in working hours must be announced in writing 3 days in advance. Right to training, promotion, and anonymous feedback without being monitored. Tyler stared at Jared, not blinking. In his mind, he recalled the mornings when he showed up, not knowing if he'd even have a shift. The fear he felt asking, "When will I get a permanent position?" The feeling of swallowing his breakfast with just water because Ray had thrown his sandwich away. All of it now erased by a printed document, which Jared called the default right of a human being. Angela pulled a large board from her bag, Code of Conduct with Colleagues, and handed it to Aaliyah to hang above the workshop door. The first line read, "Nobody here is a jack of all trades. Everyone is an expert, and everyone deserves to be called by the right name." The workshop went silent. A new intern, a young Latin boy named Emilio, spoke softly. "I never thought there was a place that really cared like this." Aaliyah turned to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You're in the right place. Here, we don't let anyone drown in silence anymore." Jared stepped out of the break room, looking at the garage now in full operation. Under the new LED lighting, every movement was clear and transparent, just like his commitment to this place. He thought of his late father, the man who once mopped the shop floor by hand and told him, "Fixing cars isn't hard, Jared. The hardest part is fixing people's hearts, and to fix people's hearts you have to live right." Now, he was living right. And this policy was not a gift, but a restitution. For all the Aaliyahs who had been forgotten, for the Tylers who had swallowed their tears, for the children like Emilio, just starting out but deserving to begin with trust. The sign, "Respect is not optional, ton trong hong fai la lua chon, ma la mak jin," was hung above the reception counter. Anyone who entered would see it. No need to ask, no need to prove, because everything had now been written into law. As the evening light slowly faded, a long day of work at Foster & Son Garage came to an end in silence. But a silence full of life, like a forest pausing its winds to nourish the soil. No more shouting, no more noisy clashes between people. Only the sound of the last engine being turned off, and the gentle clinking of tools being carefully put back in their rightful place. Jared stood alone outside the workshop, leaning against a steel column, his eyes fixed on the streaks of light spilling from the inside onto the freshly painted cement floor. That light wasn't just industrial, it was like an inner light, the light of responsibility that had awakened. Angela stepped up beside him, still holding the weekly performance evaluation board in her hands. She didn't speak right away. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the slow-moving figures inside. Tyler carefully wiping the torquey wrench. Emilio and another intern pushing a car into the inspection bay, and at the center of it all, Aaliyah, rewriting the hybrid repair procedure on the technical board. Angela spoke softly, her eyes not leaving the doorframe. "She's a natural leader. No need to shout, no need to point. Everyone just looks to her to know what to do." Jared nodded, his arms still crossed over his chest. He spoke softly, almost as if making a promise to himself more than to Angela. "I won't leave anymore. No more running things from afar. No more sending emails in place of being here. Every month I'll come back. I'll sit in the middle of the shop, listening to the machines, listening to the people." Angela smiled for the first time that day. Well then, for the first time in many years, Foster & Son won't just have your father's name. It will have your soul as well. The workshop door opened. Aaliyah stepped out, her protective coat slung over her shoulder, still holding a warm cup of water. Her eyes were tired, but they lit up with brightness when she saw the two of them standing there. She stopped, looking at Jared, her lips curling into a small but heavy smile. "We've only just begun, haven't we?" she asked. Jared stared at her for a long time, as though seeing his younger self. Not the man he was now, but the boy who once followed his father to every workshop, sitting on a plastic chair, while the man lectured about the value of honest work. He nodded slowly. "Yes, and this time, we'll do it right." Aaliyah took a few steps forward, standing close to Jared. She looked at the golden light inside the shop, where Tyler had just turned off the last light board. In her eyes there was no doubt, only the steadiness of someone who had walked through the darkness without losing their heart. "Do you think one day Foster and Son might have someone else's name on it?" she asked, half joking, half serious. Jared turned to her, his gaze slightly surprised. Then he chuckled. "If someone does such a good job that customers remember their name more than mine, then there's no reason the sign wouldn't have another name on it." Aaliyah didn't respond, but her smile this time was clearer, deeper. She turned and walked away, her eyes never leaving the garage entrance, the place where she'd once collapsed, bled from broken tools, and thought about quitting. And now, it was the place she walked through as if it was the first home she ever chose. Jared watched her retreating figure, his heart lighter, as if he had just breathed out a silent debt to his father. He was no longer here, but the values he left behind were no longer in old rulebooks or framed pictures on the wall. They lived again through Aaliyah's craftsmanship, through Tyler's attitude, through every car repaired with care, and every person treated with respect. Angela placed her hand on Jared's shoulder. "Tomorrow, I'm going to branch too. Guess what? 2 technicians have asked to be transferred here." Jared smiled lightly, looking back at the sign above the door. "Good. Let them see that this place is no longer an old mechanic shop, but a new platform. A place where people come before profit." In the twilight glow, Jared, Angela, and Aaliyah, 3 people from 3 generations, from 3 different positions, stood there. Not as CEO, operations manager, or technician, but as people safeguarding a legacy reborn, with their very selves. Inside the shop, the whiteboard had a scribbled line written by Tyler before he clocked out, "We don't just fix cars, we fix the way people are treated." Aaliyah T. and Jared knew. From here on, nothing would ever be the same again. From a rundown garage soaked in grease, shouting, and injustice, Foster and Son had been reborn, not just with fresh paint or new equipment, but with the courage to face the truth and rebuild from the human side. Jared didn't just reclaim his father's legacy, he had transformed it with respect and justice. And Aaliyah, a young black girl once looked down upon, had now become a symbol for a new generation that knows. True value isn't in age or skin color, but in the way you choose to rise. What about you? If you had the chance to change a rotten system from the inside, would you have the courage to see it through? If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next inspiring journeys. We don't just tell stories, we tell stories of justice.